So today we're going to talk a little bit about presentation and communication. And we'll go ahead and get this started here. There's a lot of reading and to do this week, so I'm not going to take up a whole lot of time. I do want to get some key points, though, just to get you kind of to see what we're talking about and the message we're trying to get across here. As I said in the welcome, if you can do the best analytics in the world, it's not going to make any impact if you can't communicate the results effectively. So what we're going to talk about in this presentation is basically the basics of presentation itself, and then a little bit on chartsmanship too. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of reading this Wall Street Journal Guide to Information and Graphics and absorbing that. Keep it at your desk side. Keep it at your desk. It is a tremendous resource to have for the entirety of your career. As you always need to make presentations and do communication. I have a short history of presentations here for you that sort of show the evolution of presentations throughout the ages. What you're really getting at here is, kind of as we learn how to communicate better and better, we start to use some of the techniques that you'll see more as we talk about this. Visual techniques, the ability to reach larger audiences, and then technology helps with some of it. PowerPoint is an interesting medium. It's become an end unto its own. Really what PowerPoint does is there's two things that PowerPoint does. One, it allows for good presentations, but it also serves now as a source of documentation, which was not really what it was intended to do, but because of the value of being able to manipulate figures and shapes and words on these things, it becomes a method of communicating information. And that's something that we want to be careful with, because you can put an entire 4-quad chart that shows the history and the plans for some big projects on a PowerPoint, and that's very different from using PowerPoint to accompany a presentation. So you want to be able to understand the difference between those. Sometimes one's useful, sometimes the other, but understand what those are. There are other things out there that don't really add to presentation. Everything seems to be kind of hanging around PowerPoint. There's other new stuff coming out, but basically a good chart, think about this, a good chart is art. I mean, what you're trying to do is very effectively communicate a message. And that's really what art does. So from a retention standpoint, think about what we're trying to, why we use some of these different techniques. Your viewer's ability to both retain and represent your output depends on how well it's incorporated into their experience. So think about things that you remember forever. They're experiences that you've had. Over here on the right, you've got experiences. And your quality and duration, that's embedded in your brain. Down as you go farther, you got some training, some things you learned in training. Then you get things, the stories that you've heard. You remember stories. Then you get down to graphics, images, and just things that people say to you. You just lose them. The more it's incorporated into your experience, the more you're going to remember it. So think about that when you're crafting these messages and communicating these messages. Stories are important. Experience is important if you can get there. Stories are important. Color, graphics, all these things that really engage are important. Also, time versus detail. Remember, the higher the level of your audience, the shorter your message needs to be. And the shorter your message needs to be, the crisper the analysis needs to be that you're using to support it. So the crisper the message needs, the more you're going to be relying on visual interpretation. Okay? You've got a short message. Make sure you get it out there clearly, succinctly, and with enough visual impact that they will remember what the message is. So that's your first step, is really decide on what your message is. What does your receiver need to know? What does the listener or the person that you're presenting to really need to understand in order to make a good decision? What decision are they trying to make? What do they need to know? What do they expect to hear? And then from a sender perspective, how can you best answer that question? Right? How can you best answer the question? What does your message need to be? And how do you best deliver it? Those are things you need to think about when you're crafting your presentation. Make sure they get that message, whatever that message happens to be. So it's easy to throw a lot of technical stuff into a presentation. Here's all the stuff we learned. Here's all the techniques we used. Does your audience really care about all of that? Get them a bottom line up front. Tell them what you're going to say. Then you say it. Then you remind them what you said. Right? That's how you get a message across. No more than 3 points on any one message. That's just the way it is. People don't remember more than that. So really focus on your message Don't try to teach people in a presentation more than they're ready to learn. Constantly improve the message. A picture's worth 1,000 words. There's this book, Thomas Barnett wrote this book. It's a great book called The Pentagon's New Map. Without going into the details of it, the interesting part of the Pentagon's New Map is how this one sort of chart that was made, and it's an ugly chart, I got a picture of it there, but it communicated a message very effectively and went through the entire Pentagon and shaped how strategy was done for about 5 years. They call it the killer chart. It's something that really just encapsulates a message and gets it going forward. You want to keep iterating on what you've got until you get to the point that you really are comfortable with what you've got is going to communicate that message in a killer chart way. Some general presentation rules. Don't use jargon. I say this all the time when we do presentations for business cases and such. Number one, don't assume the audience is smart. And I say that pejoratively, but don't assume that they know more than they would, or you think they might. And don't try to act like you're smart. Everyone knows that you're competent, right? So go for competence. Competence is expected. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking you to brief this thing. No one wants to hear about all the smart things that you know and all the jargon that's associated with it. So always be very, not eighth grade, but very verbal at the level that you think the audience is most effectively reached with. Okay, so don't throw acronyms in if you don't think that they're going to understand what those are, because a lot of times your audience will just roll with it and then they won't really understand what it was and whatever, they'll just move on. Another trick, presenting a larger study campaign. So a lot of times we'll do analytics or we'll do analysis, and what we're really presenting is one part of a larger campaign. And we really need to inform the decisions by doing multiple studies. A single study maybe doesn't get to the heart of the question, or the quality of the data might be evolving. We might be looking at sort of iteratively, saying here's what we have so far, here's how we're doing this. This needs to be presented as a part of an analysis campaign. So you can always say that. Some initial studies to lay groundwork, some basic answers, follow-on studies to refine the answer. Now, at some point, you're going to have to say, look, good is enough, pencils down, we're going to move forward with this. But what you do in the process of all this, all the best analysis gathered and presented, and you do that in the terms of a study, 1, 2, 3, 4, to the point that you're filling out that observation level, really fleshing it out, maturing it, giving them enough orientation that they can make decisions and act. You've got to fit it within whatever that time window is. But make sure you're presenting it in the fact that not everything necessarily is the end of analysis, but at some point that's going to be good enough and we have to move on. Sometimes you present this in terms of a memo, so they won't necessarily want a PowerPoint presentation or a media presentation, but they just want to document. How do I proceed? Here's how you frame those. Give your executive summary. Again, you're going to tell them what you're going to say, you're going to say it, and then you're going to tell them what you said. So executive summary lays it all out up front for someone that doesn't have a lot of time to read it. Then you go into your thesis. Here's what we went in to prove. Organization of the study, methods and tools. That gives the background. Here's the assumptions we made. Here's our results, right? And then validation and verification of the tools, and what the customer says. Then our conclusions and recommendations. Stick to that format, and you'll be in good shape. Now let's talk a little about chartsmanship. So when I say that, I mean crafting messages, typically what goes on a PowerPoint or a Google chart or whatever you want to use for a presentation. Each chart needs to make a point. Think about it when you're putting something together. Just because it's pretty doesn't mean it needs to be in the presentation. What are you trying to say with that particular chart? And does that chart say that? Does it say anything else in there that's going to distract from that message? Then take that stuff out. And always remember, iterating is important. Dry run your presentation with others. Ask someone else, what do you get out of this? Are you getting what I think I should be presenting? It's important enough to put on a chart. It's important enough to get it right. Remember, you only get so many chances with somebody. And a lot of times, depending on the executive, you may only get one chance. You may get 1 or 2 charts in, and that's kind of what they got patience for. So you got to make sure that those things are very effective and they communicate well. I've got the do's and don'ts of PowerPoint. So I mentioned to you earlier, there are sometimes PowerPoints that go along with a message, and they're kind of, 3 bullets, and they got some big text on them. This is not one of those charts. So as I got in the asterisk there, I don't follow my own rules here. But what I wanted to do with this is just lay these out for you, so you can go back and look at these in your own time and kind of look at this. But there's some do's here. Use legible type size. Make sure it's big enough for people to see. Okay, it's another thing that'll be very frustrating. You don't want to frustrate your audience. Be brief. Your phrases, cut paragraphs down to sentences, sentences into phrases, phrases into keywords. Do not put full sentences on a chart. It's very frustrating for people. Enhance the readability. Don't crowd them. Use normal case. Don't do that all capitalization stuff. That's weird. Make every word and image count. Limit number of slides. Don't overuse special effects. Don't make it all that fancy. And there's some more rules in here, so take a look at those. I've also got a do's and don'ts convention that you can look up on there from the American Speech Language Hearing Association that are helpful as well. Other suggestions for a presentation itself: maximum of 15 slides. Gauge the time for your presentation. Always make sure you got half the time for slides, and then half the time for discussion about the slides. And know how much time you're going to spend on each one of those before you get in there. Make your titles themselves meaningful. They should be able to tell the story, the title of the chart itself, so they know what they're getting into with each one. If you find yourself, I'll explain, saying things, I've heard this a lot. In a couple charts, we'll talk about that. Just move that chart up in the deck, okay? Don't get into that little habit. It's another thing that gets frustrating for people. Have a framework to the story so they know what to expect, so their flows right. And then your most important information should go in the title, upper left-hand position, and at the very bottom. Since in Western cultures, we tend to read left to right, top to bottom, the eyes tend to jump to those areas, so make sure you frame it that way. There's another document out here. It's some basic PowerPoint guidelines I put in the extra materials folder, so you can go ahead and look at that as well. It's another useful topic. It's focused really on PowerPoints that are going to accompany a presentation or a discussion. Charts and graphs. So here we get into the Wall Street Journal bit. Rich content brings meaning. Inviting visualization interprets the content. Sophisticated execution brings content graphics to life. This is important. So when you're making a chart, think about it the same way as you're making a PowerPoint. Research your data, edit to get the right set of data, plot the data, and then review it. Make sure it makes sense. So read and know the first 90 pages of that. It's key. Key points. What kind of colors should you use? What kind of palette? Don't go crazy on this. Just because you like colors, a lot of different colors, doesn't mean that it's going to make the presentation any more easier to understand. Your point is to make your chart easy to understand. Know what each kind of graph is good for. Line graphs, bar graphs, horizontal, they all do kinds of different things. They represent different things. Are your scales and your baselines appropriate? You don't have a chart where it's got just a very limited change in it when you're trying to point out some of the change and the impact of it. So these are also good points that you're going to get out of the book, and you want to look into all this. Dynamic analytics. So there are also tools out there. Some of them are very expensive. Some of them are not. Spotfire and Tableau are two major competitors in analytics space for visualization. Those are good for taking big sets of data, doing some analytics on it, and then being able to present those in a way that makes sense. They're excellent tools for customer engagement, because a lot of times you can dynamically change these. If you pull this up, you can dynamically answer questions that your audience might have, and be able to kind of dig into those a little bit. So those are useful, but you got to know what's going to happen when you make those changes on there. So keep in mind that those are potentials as well. And there's shareware versions of this out as well, open source kind of capabilities. Just be very intentional. Don't fall into the engineering trap that assumes the data is going to speak for itself. It's not, okay? It needs you to advocate for it and to tell what the story is. So put your effort in. Don't do all the work and then not do effort on the presentation. Remember, does the chart speak the right message? Are the colors good? Is the text readable? If the bar chart does it, then don't spend a bunch of programmers' time making it confusing, visually impressive. Just keep it simple. You never get a second chance to make that first impression. That's true for analytic results as well. So be very intentional and as clear as possible, and iterate until you get it all right.